Welcome to Arctic Frontiers 2026. It's a privilege to mark the 20th anniversary of a forum that over 2 decades has built bridges between science, policy, business and society. From a small conference, Arctic Frontiers has grown into a global meeting place for dialogue about the future of the Arctic. This year's theme, Turn of the Tide, reminds us that we are living through a moment of transformation. Across the world, tides are shifting, in geopolitics, in climate, and in the ways we choose to cooperate. The Arctic reflects these changes more clearly than anywhere else. As ice melts and new routes open, and as attention and interest move northward, we are called to answer new questions about security, sovereignty, and sustainability. But changing tides also bring possibility. The Arctic has long been a region where shared interests outweighed conflict. Collaboration has shown how knowledge can build trust, even in uncertain times. Today, global tension challenges that trust. Some nations scale back research cooperation, confidence in international institutions is weakened. Yet many of us continue to believe that knowledge about the environment, societies, cultures, economies, and about each other is essential for rebuilding dialogue. The tide is turning. As we look toward the next 20 years, let us work to ensure it turns towards resilience, peace, and sustainable growth for the Arctic and for all who depend on it. Thank you for being here. May these days of Arctic Frontiers inspire new ideas, new partnerships, and renewed hope in what we can achieve together.
Arktis får stadig større oppmerksomhet, men overskriftene er ikke alltid de vi ønsker oss. Vi vil bidra til å endre dette. Vi unge er ikke bare framtida i Norden. Vi er en del av nåtida. Og vi lar oss ikke stoppe av grenser. Vi ønsker dere fine dager i Tromsø, og en vellykket konferanse. Og håper at dialogen her vil bringe oss nærmere et steg i riktig retning.
Boris Boetem, welcome. On behalf of the Sami Parliament, it is my great honor to welcome you to Sápmi and to Arctic Frontiers 2026, Turn of the Tide. As a representative of the Sami people, I am proud to congratulate all of us on the 20th anniversary of the Arctic Frontiers Conference. This year's theme invites us to reflect on the lives we lead along the coasts. Tides, high and low water, and also form essential conditions for the Sea Sami culture in the fjords and coastal regions. Arctic Frontiers takes place at the same week as the Sami Week in Tromsø. With the Sami National Day on February the 6th, the festival celebrates Sami culture, sports and business with events such as reindeer racing, joik, handicrafts and markets. I hope you get the opportunity to experience some of this. I look forward to valuable discussions and networking during these days at the Arctic Frontiers. Thank you. Gito.
Welcome to Tromsø. You have arrived in the Arctic capital, and I am so pleased to welcome you here for the Arctic Frontiers Conference. Did you know that we have another capital label going on this year? Tromsø is the European Youth Capital in 2026. This will be an amazing year where we put our youth first and foremost in every issue. Tromsø is a young and vibrant city with half of the population under 35 years old. I am the deputy mayor in Tromsø, and I am myself 25 years old. The project is called True North and is truly important for us now and in the future. I want you to ask yourself, what do you do for youth today and in the future? Enjoy Arctic Frontiers and enjoy Tromsø.
The Arctic, a home between ebb and flow, between high tide and low, between progress and setback. When the tide withdraws, tensions and conflicts are revealed. When it returns, power and states pursue. Power, counterforce, east and west. Growing interest from the outside. Arctic was perceived as the dark side of the moon, now a geopolitical hotspot. When Arctic ice melts, climate and global focus change. Floods, droughts, migration, cooperation, defense, resilience. The ice shrinks, new passages open. Trade, transport, control. Those with power over the Arctic have the upper hand. But there is a moment when everything is addressed. The turn of the tide. The moment between ebb and flow. Brief, but regular. The Arctic opportunity. We must dare to seize it and use it wisely. You have heard the words before. Respect, knowledge, and cooperation.
The strongest is the one who stands alone, writes Henrik Ibsen. Not here, not in the Arctic, not in 2026. Welcome to Arctic Frontiers, Turn of the Tide.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Andreas Raspotnik. I'm here in my capacity as a senior researcher of the Fridtjof Nansen Institute in Oslo, but I'm also the director of the Heinolf Center for Business and Governance in, I would say, the best town in northern Norway called Bodø. And for those who are interested in football, knows what we're talking about. A common joke. I have to do it. Sorry for that. But we're not here to talk about Bodø Glimt or the Bodø-Tromsø rivalry. We talk here about what Arno mentioned before, about the geopolitics and how geopolitical change, how change outside the Arctic affects the Arctic. And I'm really happy that we managed to set up this, I can say, last-minute event, and that we have a full house. So thank you very much for all of you for joining us. Thank you very much for the Norwegian Center of Geopolitics, which is a project, an idea where the Fridtjof Nansen Institute is very much part of. And you see the other partners here. It's also the University of the Arctic here in Tromsø, the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, I have to say that, the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies, and of course UiO, the University of Oslo. And again, the idea here is to talk maybe less about the Arctic, but talk more about a major actor south of the Arctic with a clear idea of what the Arctic future could be or should be or is about to develop, has been developing for the last 15 years, the European Union, and how the very place we're in here, the very country we are based here in, Norway, could or should closer interact with the European Union and vice versa when it comes to Arctic issue. And all of you know how complex the Arctic is. Those Europeans in the room here know how complex the institutional body, the European Union, is. So we try to bring that together. And we try to better understand with this session how changes globally, but very much in Europe, affect the Arctic and how the European Union and Norway could together navigate their policies, their approaches in and for the Arctic, knowing very much also the complex relationships between Norway and the EU. And then maybe that's a topic for another session or for the politicians in here. But that's a bit the idea of this project. And we want to kick it off. I'll introduce the speakers when they come here. I'll ask the first speaker come here. He gives a brief intro mark. Then I'll ask the next one. And in order to put all this geopolitical change, not over the last few weeks, but maybe the last year, maybe the last 10 years, a bit in academic perspective. We're very, very happy that Professor Klaus Dodds will do that. Again, for those who know a bit about the Arctic and geopolitics in the Arctic, have heard about Klaus. And I look very much forward, Klaus, to your input and enlighten us on what has happened over the last few years globally and how that affects in the Arctic And you have to hold a mic, if I figured out. Number 2. Mic drop. Thank you. Just join me here.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you very much for pulling this panel together in record quick time, and it's a real pleasure to be speaking with everybody here and to be back actually at Arctic Frontier. It's been a bit of a gap. So let me try and land literally 5 or 6 points in the allotted time that I have, because I'm going to have to move quickly. We heard a lot about turning the tide. A couple of weeks ago, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, I think, spoke very well about rupture. That seems to me actually what we should be focusing on, with no disrespect intended to the organisers. Tides are important, undercurrents are dangerous, but I think Carney nailed it when he talked about rupture. What he also did, which I think was very helpful, although I'm having to insert one word into his speech, he talked about geometries. I'd rather talk about power geometries rather than geometries per se, because I think what Carney did, and you would expect this being a banker of some reputation, he understands well how things are entangled, and he certainly understands the underground infrastructure, you might say, that binds us together even when we want to drift apart. Remember this, what stops Donald Trump taking over Greenland? It's not the NATO Secretary General, it's the moves of the market and the volatility of the US dollar, partly what Carney was getting at. There are these geometries that matter even for the largest economies in the world. So the last 12 months, I think it'd be fair to say, have been absolutely exhausting for some of the third parties directly affected. I think it's really important and behoven upon people like myself, who spend a great deal of time writing about these things, to express solidarity with those directly affected. I think it's not been nice to be on the receiving end of what I can only describe as blunt force trauma geopolitics. The reasons for all of this are complicated, and we can talk about ego politics, we can talk about geopolitics, we can talk about spheres of influence, but Andreas's intervention is important in the sense that, candidly, whatever we once spoke about in terms of Arctic exceptionalism is over, and we really need to accept it is over. It is not coming back. Certainly not in the way that we once might have thought it existed 10, 15 years ago. Now, I don't think we need to be gloomy, but we certainly need to be alert and highly vigilant. So, some of the things that I think we will need to look out for. Number one, there is a global Arctic, and I don't want to overly romanticize it, but what goes on in Dubai, Saudi Arabia, India, and other parts of the world is hugely important. I can say drab things like follow the money, but I could also remind you that India is an enormous refiner of Russian oil, and much of that oil ends up in the European Union. On a positive note, I'm delighted to hear the European Union has finally got round to banning the importation of Russian gas. That's been a work in progress, but actually the European Union has moved quite quickly by its standards to do all of that. The downside is we've just created new dependencies elsewhere in terms of where that natural gas comes from. So one of the things I think we've learned about this global Arctic is that money, energy, and collaboration and facilitation has been enormously important. I won't dwell on the numbers of Russian-based companies that operate in and out of Dubai to make the point, but that has been enabling and empowering the Russian Federation since 2022, onwards, actually before, but really since 2022 onwards. A couple other things. That relationship between the European Union and associate members and non-members, including my state, the United Kingdom, that I'm a citizen of, provides also opportunities. And that's the point about a rupture. A rupture is a dramatic thing. It will leave scarring, unquestionably, but it also creates opportunities. And I think the current government in the UK sees it as much as an opportunity as a lament. So the things that I would expect to happen: number one, in terms of military and security, there are fresh opportunities for the United Kingdom to play a really positive role. We do have things to offer in terms of intelligence capability, military capability, and we only have one special relationship, ladies and gentlemen, and that's with Norway. It's not with the United States. So in the United Kingdom, we need to stop telling ourselves who we have a special relationship with. It is Norway, full stop. We have other warm relations with other European, other NATO states, but it's fundamentally, that's our special relationship. I think from that, we also then have an opportunity to rekindle those relations with our European Union partners, and the Arctic, the North Atlantic, is as good a place as any to do that heavy lifting. It's also worth saying, in terms of solidarity and collective action, we shouldn't forget that civil society, indigenous peoples, universities, and others who are involved in the knowledge production that we talked about at the start here also have a place to play, in the sense of that we should not forget at this time of rupture, as I said right at the start, those acts of solidarity, collaboration, cooperation matter. The world doesn't have to be in the state that it is, but we nonetheless have to be clear-eyed about what indeed we are facing. From our point of view, particularly, and I'll end on this note, Andreas, I'm very conscious, I'm speaking to you in the north of Norway, a part of the world that has seen near constant belligerence, agitation, massive disinformation and disruption caused by the Russian Federation. So when we talk about low-intensity conflict, hybrid warfare, I'd rather we didn't. I'd rather we recognize that we are in a confrontation. There is not going to be a reset with the Russian Federation. And bear all this in mind, China has been aiding and abetting all of the above, because without China, Russia would not be continuing to do what it does. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Klaus, don't leave. Don't leave.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just felt we were on a tight time.
No, we're flexible, it's the north. I have a quick follow-up question to all of you, and then I'll start with you. Can you say a few more words about the UK? What is happening in the UK, or what has happened in the UK maybe over the last year? You know, you said it could play a pivotal role. Maybe the entire perspective, what we experienced after Brexit, is also changing a bit, or is that misleading? Or what's going on with those, what has happened in the UK after experiencing not only the last few weeks, but maybe the last year?
Well, let me give you one prediction, and I hope I'm wrong. One prediction is the European Union can't get itself together, and then actually what happens is, indirectly, is the EU fragments. And one vision I have is that the United Kingdom, Norway, Canada, and what I'm going to call the Hanseatic League of European states decide actually they're better working amongst themselves. Because in the end, to get through a rupture, what you have to be able to do is restore good faith. And you have to look at one another and think, these are the kind of nations or citizens that we can do business with. So my feeling is that this is a golden opportunity to put Brexit to one side, don't finger point, but just say the world looks and feels vastly different to when it did in 2016. And why did people vote for Brexit? I don't need to over-rehearse this. It's not because they really hate the European Union per se. It's a centre-periphery problem. And that's true of vast areas of Europe. That's the bit you should focus on. For the European Union and the Arctic, I would say this. Just focus on the things where you can actually do positive good. Don't tell European states and indigenous communities, northern communities, what they should or shouldn't be doing. They've been living it, particularly the last 4 or 5 years, which has not been very pleasant. So the European Union, get in your lane, understand the divisions of labour, take subsidiarity seriously, and stop squabbling. We haven't got time for it. Strategic Defence Investment Fund being the kind of example I'm thinking about. You should be welcoming the UK back with opening arms.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We can follow up on that. So the EU, if the EU doesn't get its fund together, let's put it that way, I want to introduce now a European to the table and talk a bit about what has happened in Europe over the last years, and what are Europe's ideas, maybe for the North, but also how to act in that global environment. In order to do that, we're very happy that Robert Habeck is here, who is now a senior analyst at the Danish Institute for International Affairs, but hopefully known for you, to all of you, as former German Vice Chancellor. So Klaus, you have Klaus again. What's going on?
It's the Nordic.
The Brits take
we are
over.
flexible.
Yeah. I like maybe I can follow up on what Klaus actually said on
the first part overcoming Brexit. We change our first names and then we have it.
You all come back. No, but I would like to touch upon what Klaus actually said about the Hanseatic League. I mean, it's not a new debate in Europe. Those who are willing should work closer together. And we know Europe is a continent of compromises, and I think that's the beauty of Europe. You try to bring 27, 28 states together in order to find a compromise on many different levels, You have experienced that for many years on a practical level. Could you enlighten us a bit, like what has happened in Europe over the last few years, maybe also a bit in Germany, and how do you see that reflects into the northern parts of Europe?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and good morning, everyone. Maybe I'm allowed to give 3 remarks or observations and then answer your question and come back to where Klaus has taken us. The first remark is, though I'm doing now research and become one of yours in a way, I can't get the politician out of my head. And the difference between research and science and politics is basically having a good argument and winning a good argument is not the same. It's like completely the difference, as you can see in the US. When you try to win an argument, you can use all kinds of methods, including lies and maybe bribery. I don't know what. And having an argument, I mean, this is now the sphere of logic and rationality, and this is not always the case in politics. So I very much speak from the perspective of a politician and always ask, what is the interest? What is the meaning of it, and not what is the really sense of it? Of course, I try to understand the sense, but this is my first remark, that you understand my perspective and my remarks. Secondly, when you ask about the interests, it's very easy to find the interests of the others. So to say, the others could also be potential partners, but when I mean the others, then it's the big powers that are now entering the Arctic, or are there Russia, US, and China, of course. So, and just on a just overview, I think you're very familiar with that. You can say that Russia wants to defend its own interest sphere. So denying access, at least Western European access, and then you can argue what belongs to these interest spheres, and does this include some aggressive movement where Russia could say, well, for our own interest, we need this or that territory to get access to whatever, raw materials, protect our northern fleet, whatever. But denying access and having a safe zone, you can say this is the Russian interest. I would say very aggressively. So from my point of view, they're moving forward. But the interest, if you are fair to them, could be from their own understanding. We need to protect our last line of defense, the northern fleet, the nuclear capacity. Murmansk cannot be under threat of whatever they think Norway or Sweden or Finland can do or would do. China wants to have access. This is not the same, basically. They want to, I think, basically have access to sea routes. They want to have access to raw materials, maybe to fishery as well. So they want to be part of the great theater of the Arctic. And the US, very clearly now, wants to have their fair share up there. And when you look to the Greenland debate, or remember the Greenland debate, Trump named it all the time. It shifted because he's Trump. It was raw materials, and then all these Russian and Chinese ships, Greenland should not be overtaken by them, and maybe also the interest of becoming or making people rich and becoming rich and building Trump hotels, as he posted once in, I think, 2018. So, but a lot of interest there from the American side. When you think about the debate, the Danish debate about Greenland, it's hard to name the interest of Denmark in Greenland. Why has Denmark an interest in Greenland? I mean, of course, it belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark, but what everyone said, including Mette Frederiksen, who did a great job at that time, was saying, well, Greenland is not for sale, Denmark also not, and open for business, and it's up for the Greenlanders to decide. So you could think that their interest, not outspoken, is defending rule-based order, I don't know, multilateral order and don't let the other ones just take a piece of the cake because they just want it. But this is not a hardcore interest like the others could name it. And the question I'd like to put on the table is, what is the European interest? Like, not preserving the status quo as Arctic exceptionalism, but what is really the interest? And this is not outspoken. Europe could, for example, say Greenland or maybe the Arctic is important because we want to have more independence with raw materials. We want to exploit raw materials. They could also say the other thing and say we want to protect the environment. So like we have the idea to freeze it all. Though the ice is melting, we freeze the status quo and nobody should get a hand on raw materials, including fossil minerals or hydrocarbon, because we want to protect the climate. But this is not really going well with the Norwegian argument, because the Norwegians might say our interest is to secure our hydrocarbon production. Do we have a military interest, and what exactly is it? Does we, the Europeans, now say we need Greenland to defend the European access to the polar? Do we want to have access? So do we want to have a part of the thing that everyone could agree on, like this law of the sea should apply to the Arctic and there should be root disorder? Do we, the Europeans, want to protect the sea routes also militarily, as you can think that the US and maybe the Chinese and definitely the Russians would like to do? So what is the interest in a way of political interest? Not everyone should love each other and we want to have peace on earth, but a hardcore, definable interest for political action. And it's hard to find it. If you look at it, you come to the nations, and then the interest differs, I would say. I guess Norway, as we are now in Norway, is the first country could name interest, like fishery and hydrocarbons, mainly gas production. But even there, I was also responsible for climate action in my time in office. Even there, the question is how long once or Norway thinks it could produce natural gas and sell it to the world due to climate issues. So at least Germany said, and Germany is now a great off-taker of Norwegian gas, in 20 years it's over. 2045, we want to be climate neutral. And well, this is now only 19 years to go. And maybe, yes, you can do blue hydrogen, so you can do CCS and bring the CO2 back. But then it's time to develop the technique and develop the infrastructure and protect the infrastructure. But this is, and this was very much to my core work, this is not decided. So it is, in a way, there is an interest, but it's not really applying to everything else. And this is, I think, up to debate for the European Union and for the European countries. Now coming back to where Klaus led us, and I think he's completely right. The next big conference after Arctic Frontiers is Munich Security Conference. And if the result from the Munich Security Conference would be that the European leaders would say, now Europe has to be united, we should skip the conference. Nobody should go there, because this is only the starting point and could not be the result. The result must be, in a moment like this, that I don't know if Europe, this is the question, if Europe is the right phrase, but that the countries who believe in liberal democracy find alliances, and therefore they need to define their own interests, like in a way I tried to describe right now. And this is not going to happen. I can't even see the formality of a discussion, because there is the European Union, yes, but there's Great Britain, there's Norway, very close linked to the European Union, but not part of the council decisions of the European Union. There's Ireland, the same. Canada is maybe the most European country not being part of Europe, so this is like a close alliance, and also the politicians feel like it, but it's very bilateral now. So this is not really going well, I would say. It's not, there's not one council, one common room where all these interests were discussed, valued, and also decided, as I just tried to explain, and the decision is not made. One last point, why is this so important? And there we might differ a little bit, Klaus and me. Because I think, and I came to know, when you have, like, everyone comes together but then leaves and doing his or her thing, it becomes more costly. Look what's happening with defense spending. every nation now is increasing defense spending. Okay, that's good, and we waited long enough, and that was a mistake. But I can't see that the European leaders, at least, had made a decision who is doing what. Basically, everyone is doing the same as before, but with more money. And if that would be the decision, I would say, okay, that's fine. That's maybe pragmatic, because defining an own European defense industry, maybe in combination with Great Britain and including Canada, maybe it's too complex, maybe it's too complicated. So yes, we know it's more costly, it's more expensive, that every nation is doing its own thing, but because we can move faster, we decide we're doing this like that. Okay, that's a political, practical decision. But it wasn't taken. There was no decision. So it's just happening. It's just there. So everyone is coming and leaving, and at least from an economic perspective, this is madness, because we're doing now every nation like 3 or 4 times the same thing, where we could share and then share forces and combine forces and divide it. So I think some institutional reform is necessary, and as I consider myself as a true European, I would be happy if that would be at least an alliance and not contradicting the European Union. But you see where we are, and this is the point, I think, where the discussion stands. And one last remark, Arctic exceptionalism is not only over in the sense that other conflicts are now spoiling over to the Arctic. I think it's the first time now, at least in modern history, that conflicts could arise in the Arctic and spoil over to other conflicts. Now it's not like in Second World War, Greenland is part of this theater in Europe, and like in the Cold War, Greenland is part of the defense line, Golden Dome, and so on and so forth. Now, due to the melting ice, I think it's the first time that this now becomes really relevant, because things can also start with a conflict in the Arctic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. I also a follow-up question to you, based a bit on what you said, and also following up what Klaus said. I mean, if we assume, and what we read a lot about, the war in Ukraine had an effect on Europe. Now Trump's second administration has an effect. But we lack somebody who decides on how to move forward, within Europe, And we can argue, of course, we know about the compromise that it is the EU. We know the competences that the supranational level has. We know the member states. Is then the one problem we face in Europe a leader that takes us forward? Arguing maybe that Macron is some kind of a lame duck. Merz is probably not promising foreign policy-wise what some people hoped he did. Italy is a different question. Spain's too far away. Poland, maybe the UK could be, but is outside. So are we lacking a leader, although we know that the changes are affecting us and we go towards a direction of we have to think more as a unity, more as a European Union outside? Yeah, that was the... And is then, if we talk about compromise, is that the beauty of compromise that Europe has developed over the last 60, 80 years, is that not valid anymore for the 21st century?
So, as you know, I'm a German, and I hesitate to call after a leader, as due to our history. But leadership definitely is required. I think that Ursula von der Leyen is a strong leader, basically. I think also though she's German, maybe the first true European leader. She thinks European. She's not thinking as a German and then try to translate it to the European level. She comes from the European level. So maybe the first time, even when you compare it to other presidents of the European Union. But you are right, there's no momentum. There's no kind of hope and change Obama kick-off 2008 kind of thing. And because it's Europe and so complicated, you need always leadership and partnership combined. So don't think that one person could fix it, but maybe a combination of people. I experience, and maybe I'm romantic now and I become older myself, but when Obama and then suddenly Trudeau and also Macron in the moment, also Zelensky when he was elected, I had the feeling now, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago, there was a momentum of a new generation of politicians who really want to move the world forward to a better place. Something of this momentum from different people now that are not have this bureaucratic aura is needed. Yes, I think so.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We'll come back to the discussion later. Third, on the presentation, I want to invite my colleague from the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, Iselin Stensdal, to put Some of the Arctic debates into context. We heard about China already, and Iselin works a lot on China and China's interest in the Arctic. So Iselin, question is also for you. We heard a lot about the geopolitics of the Arctic and China's interest. Could you also, based on your research, say a few words about how you think about China in the Arctic and the geopolitics around it?
Can we actually go back a bit further?
You can
take 2 steps back.
Because
I think the overarching premise for the world right now is the US-China relationship. Yes, and whatever happens everywhere else, that's kind of the leading star. So how did we get there? Yes, so I'm a China expert. I sort of my my expertise of the Arctic comes via China and the Arctic, but I've been following for like 15 years now. So, so how the Chinese-US relationship? So China is kind of the challenger. It is not only it's a challenger to the US. And how did China come there? Well, we don't have to go several hundred years back, but let's go back to 1978 when China decided to open up. And then in the 1990s, we had debates on should we let China into the World Trade Organization? That will surely, help the world, and maybe China will become a democracy. Happened in 2001 that China became a member, not yet a democracy. So this is in China they have this Soviet legacy of 5-year plans. So economic policy in China has been kind of running steadily, hardworking 5-year plans periods. And they've achieved a lot, reduced poverty, increased living standards. And I would say we've all benefited from China. When I grew up in the 80s, 90s, things were made in Taiwan. And then after 2000, things were made in China, basically. And after 2000, the Chinese thinking was, okay, so we have a peaceful rise. We don't want to scare the world. We were coming here in peace. And over time, this has sort of changed to more great power ambitions. There's a lot, that China can show for renewable energy technologies. So I think with what was installed last year of power capacity, China now has more added power capacity than most countries have, like total. so that's quite impressive, and also. When I was a student, I worked for a Chinese telecom company in Norway. And then we just would joke that like, copyright to the Chinese means the right to copy. But we've gone from, copying to more innovation in China. Of course, I'm simplifying here a lot, not without troubles. We saw in 2012, the solar PV market kind of crashed because of overcapacity in China. So the European industry kind of went out of business. There's been internal problems in China with air pollution, for example, for driving this economic growth. And, like we see now, the People's Liberation Army, the committee, there's even Zhang Youxia, who was supposed to be Xi Jinping's closest ally, is now out. So, but there's a lot to sort of explain how China has come to where it is today. And it makes sense for the US to try to contain China in the Arctic, everywhere in the world. To me, I've been following China, I think it changed under the first Trump administration. Biden didn't really change the message, he just sort of changed the format of what he was saying. He didn't tweet it, he just said it in more, common diplomatic language. And then when Trump was re-elected, I think China was much more prepared this time. And when Trump last year said, or maybe even in 24 said, okay, tariffs, I'm going to hit, China with tariffs. China said, okay, then no minerals for you. Because, they have something to punch back with. I don't think I don't think his strategy worked very well. Of course, the US was the largest trading partner of China, but still, Chinese exports grew 5% last year. So, there's a lot of other countries in the world. I think sort of China's approach is just being a bit quiet. While we were watching Venezuela earlier, I guess last month, or in February, China had a visit from South Korea. And actually, I went and checked on the Foreign Ministry website. So just listen to this list. This is the list of official delegations that Beijing received this year. Starts with South Korea, Pakistan, Ireland, Canada, Finland, UK, Azerbaijan, and Uruguay. Yeah, that's like 8 state visits in, 5 weeks? So, and yesterday, there's actually a China Nordic Arctic conference going, well, it started yesterday and it's running today as well. And I talked to Chinese, like, what do you think of the situation? And they just shook their head. I don't think they understand too much either. So when we sort of think of China as a stable and predictable partner, I think that's also, I mean, that's what China wants. The Chinese like harmony, they hate chaos. And for Europe, we've been thinking of the Western countries, NATO, that's our group. But we have to remember it looks very different from China, where China sits. So China says that it's happy to sort of cooperate with all countries, and that includes Russia. That includes India. Yeah. And do we, get to the Arctic now?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
How does that play out in the Arctic? I mean, you have looked into
I think
the interests of China, the public, the narratives,
we need to have two things can be true at the same time. Yes, China is interested in the Arctic, but also China's not that interested in the Arctic. Both are true. So China has, great power aspirations, wants to become a great maritime power, access to resources. So then the Arctic fits into that description. But it's absolutely not a sort of high priority on the foreign policy agenda. And also as the Western Arctic countries have become more skeptical, at least until this year, towards China, the only sort of Arctic partner left is Russia. And what I think China and Russia have in common, of common interest for the Arctic, is shipping. But they're not that, they don't fully agree either, right?
All right. Yeah. What's the Norwegian perspective on all of that?
On all this?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I think so. As I mentioned, the China Nordic conference. I think China sort of looked at the map and thought, okay, the Nordic countries are small. We can deal with them as one. But that's not really the case. I think maybe Sweden has a sort of more complicated relationship with China than Norway because, well, bilateral problems and jailing of Swedish citizens, etc. So I think Norwegians are quite... the Norwegian government has sort of... we have certain areas that we would like to cooperate with China on. Green transition, renewable energies. That's also relevant for the Arctic. But at the same time, with security concerns, there are other areas that are maybe not so open for business.
All right. Let's touch about then later on when we bring all of the panelists on stage and how we can think about that from a broader European perspective. Yes, thank you very much, Iselin. Last but definitely not least, I want to ask Gunhild Høgesen-Schjøf from the University of Tromsø, UiT, to the table, or to a panel, to a floor. And Gunhild, can you work in Norway? You work in Northern Norway. You have Canadian background, I heard before. You have a Dutch background. But basically from your workplace here, how do you see that entire geopolitical change? How is it discussed here? How is it discussed at university within your work? And how do you put that into a Norwegian, European perspective? Interesting.
It will, because I'm going to do what everybody else has done and say, well, I have some comments first.
That's exactly
and so then I will come to try to answer your question. Because there's a couple of things that I want to pull from our colleagues here on from Klaus and Robert and Iselin. And I want to look at both Arctic exceptionalism and in light of hybrid threats and warfare. And so I'm going to start that as a context, because this has a lot of impact in what we're experiencing, not least in North Norway, and this that we have definitely been impacted by what's called hybrid threats. I will get more into that. But the first starting point is this whole concept about Arctic exceptionalism. And I wasn't a fan before. But I mean, really, Arctic exceptionalism, if we unpack it, and also from, like, when I say before, before 2022, or when Arctic exceptionalism has told us that, here is, I don't know, what you cross the polar circle and then, whoa, like suddenly everyone's getting along. And but this cooperation, right? And this was very important. But cooperation between Canada and the Nordic states was never important. I mean, who cares? It's actually just cooperation between those two former superpowers. That is what was the United States, or what is still, and what was the Soviet Union and was Russia after in the 1990s. That is what we were really talking about, and the fact that, well, here was this cooperation. Now, if we dig deeper, and we can talk about this, the interests of those states to cooperate in the Arctic were instrumental to this type of cooperation. And so we can say that, okay, first came 2014 with Russia's invasion into, or, annexation of Crimea. But even then, as a matter of fact, Arctic cooperation, it got bigger, like it was expanding and stuff. I guess in a little bit of an idea that, I may be talking too close to this thing, in the idea that, well, if we make nice with Russia, that this will go over or such. That did not happen. Instead, we come to 2022, and that's when we start saying, oh, this Arctic exceptionalism, it's over. I want to be a little bit cheeky and suggest maybe we're in Arctic exceptionalism 2.0. But the thing is, you see a cooperation, a form of cooperation, maybe at least an agreement. You play on your side, I'll play on mine, between the United States and Russia, where they're playing this big sort of like geopolitical rivalry, yes, and they'll say the right words, but at the end of the day, they don't want to go to war with each other. But instead, they're interested in having their spheres of influence, right? And for so doing, what this means is also throwing Europe and Canada under the bus. And that's what we've been seeing, this sort of articulate, particularly from Trump's side. I mean, you can just see Putin is sitting there eating the popcorn of this entire year. And she, as Iselin pointed out, quietly going like, this is fucking fantastic. Because on the trade side, so these are this is this new sort of geopolitical world we're taking a look at, and exactly as Klaus was saying, the rupture. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, this is what he was trying to get across. Like, this is, sorry folks, the show is over. And when we are talking about Arctic exceptionalism, maybe we should look at it in this, there's a new type of cooperation in town, and this ain't going well for us. So what does this mean for Europe? It means that we have two sort of larger powers, and also, I might add, struggling great powers. I mean, these countries aren't at their peak, That's why there's this Make America Great Again type of rhetoric that has won purchase in the United States, because the United States hasn't been a constant success over time, not least because of China and the competition with China and the products coming out of China, which is way cheaper than coming out anywhere else. But, we're talking about struggling great powers. They're not 100% there. And that makes them, in my view, more dangerous. So we have that. And where Europe then, what do we do with that? Do we just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, so, and buy into the spheres of influence? This is a multipolar world, we could say. There's so many who are talking about that. Okay, well, Europe, I've seen some commentary saying, well, we can't survive without the United States, or we can't do this and we can't do that. And it's true, the relationship with the United States and our dependency on the United States for defense is enormous. And Europe can't replace what the United States can bring to the table. But we're also not completely helpless. And at the end of the day, we have no choice. And that's what Carney was talking about. He's saying, we have no choice. So whatever we have, we got to get our together. And in the Arctic, whether or not, the whole idea of whether or not we're going to see confrontation in the Arctic, I think for the time being, we may not see classic military confrontation, but what we are seeing, and this has been mentioned already, is the increase, the bombardment of what are called hybrid threat activities. And this is like the whole array of activities from espionage, sabotage, disinformation campaigns, different types of influence operations, electronic operations. I was going to say, I could give you a whole paper on this. That's because I've written many papers on this. So I can go into detail. But the point is, under threshold, and the target is, and this is getting me back to actually North Norway, because the target is us. When we're talking under threshold, we're talking about non-military or predominantly non-military. You can, in a hybrid threat scenario, include military types of measures, but actually it's under threshold so that you're not in a position where you're declaring war. There is no war to declare. Nevertheless, there's measures being sent out into our communities, and particularly entering the civilian domain, to increase doubt, mistrust, and exacerbate political polarization, particularly by targeting existing vulnerabilities. So this brings me back to North Norway. Do we have existing vulnerabilities? Damn straight we do. We have quite a few, not least because, as has been said by multiple governments here in Norway, no matter which side of the room you're on in the parliament, it's people make the difference in North Norway. The security of North Norway and the security of Norway as a whole is dependent on the people. Well, we're having an outmoving of utflykt. We're moving out of North Norway, in part because of various. We struggle with critical infrastructure. This is all stuff we can get into, but and this is also a northern issue because it's the same thing in Canada. Canadian security is very much dependent on what's happening in northern Canada. Have you seen northern Canada? It's big, and have you been there? Trying to get around a critical infrastructure. We're even lucky with what we have here. But the point is, we're not actually investing in securing northern Norway, which is essential to the overall structure of security for Europe. So what we need is Canada and Europe. So we want to redraw the map, and it may be with Northern Europe, as Klaus was saying, to bring in the northern, so the Nordic countries with Canada and maybe a little bit farther south into Europe, and make it appealing for the rest of Europe that here we're getting our act together, hopefully, and that we are also being able to offer something to the rest of Europe. Because exactly as has been said by numerous, all of us here, in Europe, because we are not all one head talking together, it's very difficult to get all these different types of states who are operating at the same time. So what it comes down to then, if we get a constellation of Europe, because again, we have no choice. Whatever it is, we have to, step up to the plate anyways. And with Canada, that our interests are both economic, absolutely, strengthen those sides. And we see that happening because Ursula von der Leyen, the biggest trade deal is including with Latin America, Canada with China, and so forth. So trade and spreading it around more, spreading our connections much better around the world as equal partners, not as we're here to help out the rest of the world. It's defense, absolutely, and as Robert was talking about, we really got to get our act together on just what we mean by that, and how we're not necessarily duplicating, but having better cooperation. But the third thing is also on values, because at the moment, there's very few entities in the world that are actually standing up for liberal democracies. And as imperfect as this system is, it's the system we're actually quite comfortable with. And I don't think we want to go to something else. And there are other countries in the world that are also equally dependent on international law, on the rule of law, and this world-based or this order, rules-based order that imperfect as it is, with the United Nations, it actually has been functioning to a degree that is many like. So this is what we're standing up for. And I think if we recognize this, we can move forward. So I'm trying to think optimistically, but we really got to or get off the pot. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Also a follow-up question to you. I mean, for those who know a bit about the Europeans' history when it comes to the North, we know that in the 90s, when Finland joined the EU, Paavo Lipponen came up with the Northern Dimension. So a bit of an idea what the North could be for Europe, you know. And the Northern Dimension are gone. The Barents Cooperation are gone. You sit up here in Northern Norway and you talk about cooperation, new forms of working together. What's our responsibility up here to tell the South, Brussels, Berlin, Madrid, Paris, this kind of new narrative, a new idea like what the North could also bring to southern capitals in Europe? Like, how do we do that in the North? How do we tell them, you know what, come up here, we actually know that, you know, but what's our responsibility in diaspora instead of like, okay, we know that we like people, we have explained it to Oslo many times, they're not listening per se. What could we do better in that regard?
Well, I would start on a smaller scale, just within the Nordic countries themselves, which are very southern heavy, right? You know, because everybody is living in the southern extremities of the Nordic countries, to listen to their own Norths. So there's, and this was also mentioned before, is the fact that to come up to the North and say, well, you got to do this, that, and the other, that is not so effective. Of course, there's sort of like more broad national policies, but the thing is that the Nordic countries, and then also in Canada, need to be stepping up to the plate. There's been so much rhetoric, or so much, you know, like a speaking to, but you got to walk the talk. And it has to do with how we in Norway are treating communities in the North, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. You hear that also from the Canadian side. This here need to walk the talk. This is also part of securing democratic values. We actually really need to be doing it rather than just saying it at times. So that is a very important part. But also that if we manage to gain a cooperation, exactly as what has been suggested already by the previous panelists, but also from colleagues elsewhere. There's Stan Rynning, who's like one of our preeminent NATO experts. He also is talking about the importance of northern countries to be able to coalesce, and that we demonstrate that we're here to fight for democracy, and we can do so because we're actually strong countries also economically and defensively, because we need those two as well, but that we can step up with the values and show the value of protecting what we have at the moment, that we can hopefully bring in the rest of Europe. It's a simple thing.
Right. Yeah. Wasn't it a Finnish president, Stubb, who said, why do we need 300 million people if we have 500 million people to counter 150 million people in Russia? Yeah. It's as simple. It's all about numbers and geometry. Yeah. So thank you very much. I now want to ask all the panelists to the floor, please. We still have half an hour, so I hope you have many, many questions. I'll open the floor to the audience in a minute. But before I do so, why not... We just have to throw around. Yeah. Why not starting with the one question we put on the slide here? How should Norway and the European Union navigate this new Arctic? You know, practically, conceptually, again, whoever wants to think about that. I mean, we alluded to some parts. You know, we heard about the practical issues and the complexities around it. But what could be new ideas, new steps for both the EU and Norway to together think about this new Arctic and this new world? Klaus, you raised your hand.
Maybe can I use that?
Yeah, you maybe can just share that one.
Yeah, no, thank you. Could I maybe just insert the UK as well?
Obviously.
Okay, obviously. If you have us.
It's in the EU. It's E-UK.
I think, let me just make a point about the Arctic. I am a geographer, so forgive me, I would say this. I'm not going to do that parlor game in terms of where the Arctic begins and ends. That's not terribly interesting. But I would just say, let's also remember the Arctic, even if we agree what it is a volume. So things go through it, things happen in it, but also things get entangled elsewhere. So I think one of the things to bear in mind, and it comes back to that point about the northern people's Northern Dimension. And I like your point, actually, about Northern Dimension 2.0 or Arctic Exceptionalism 2.0. Did get me thinking about, part of our challenges as Europeans is we're caught in the crosshairs between three great powers. They certainly think of themselves as great powers. Whether they are or not, that's another discussion. But we are caught in the crosshairs. And I think our dilemma is, whilst we can stand here and say, why on earth aren't people spending more time and effort thinking about northern territories, northern communities, and everything else? You've got southern European states who are having existential anxieties about the Mediterranean, about, for example, illegal and irregular migration. And I think our challenge is, it is in the end a very large continental and insular set of spaces that are being buffeted by geopolitical and geoeconomic forces. So when we think about how should Norway and the EU navigate the Arctic, the problem for poor old EU is it's got a lot of difficult spaces to navigate. So our question is, why should we prioritize this part of Europe as opposed to other parts of Europe? So that's one thing to say. The only other thing I would say is about, again, all the panelists have made this very well. It's about partly generating coalitions of the willing and having those shared values, norms, and rules, because it really, to ask Norway to do the heavy lifting, for example, in this space, is frankly speaking, mission impossible. And that's why I said earlier, I do think there are fresh opportunities to work well with countries like the UK, associate member Iceland, Canada in particular. But also, I just want to, because I'm conscious of the audience here as well, let's not forget our American friends as well. It's very easy to be lazy and to somehow think that Trump equals the US. The US is an extraordinary complex society of whatever it is, 350 million people. There's also opportunities there, however faint, to remind ourselves that we have had a very, very important set of relationships with the United States. And in the end, I think I'd rather work with the United States, certainly than compared to Russia, China, work in progress. But funny how you can recast yourself as a reliable partner.
As a follow-up here, maybe then to all of you, like Gunhild talked about changing, or it's about sphere of influences now. And when we talk about the Arctic, could the Arctic be too complex for Europe and said, okay, instead of the entire Arctic, we don't care that much about the Bering Strait, the Pacific. We focus on our Arctic. The European Arctic, move over the transatlantic relationship with Canada, Greenland, that's the Arctic we focus on, and maybe not talk about the Arctic anymore, but again, it's a bit more a narrative thing, but let's talk about maybe the Nordics or the European Arctic or something else to make it more appealing to someone in Berlin, in Madrid, in Rome or something. Sorry, that was just... Ethan, you were.
Well, in answer to your question, how should Norway and I guess we could say Europe navigate the Arctic? So for Norway, I think the whole EU membership should be a debate again. I was not old enough to vote last time this was up for election. I think it's a kind of everything has just shown the vulnerabilities of Norway now. And for Norway, we have a large shadow fleet outside our coast. So how do we deal with that? And in the EU, there's, there are sort of rules and regulations to protect EU business interests. But what if something happens to a Norwegian ship? Probably we wouldn't be included. Yeah. So I think for Norway, there's just some discussions we need to have on sort of how to be a European country. But on a bit, I'm very happy, by the way, that you brought up values. I totally agree. Democracy is good, and I want to live in a democracy. However, it seems to me that we as Europeans, we live with a narrative that's kind of clouding our vision. We have these predetermined good or bad labels on countries, like the villain number 1, Russia, villain number 2, China. US used to be the good guy. And by sort of not just looking at the actions for what they are, like calling it a war, not a genocide. I think we could sort of see clearer and make more better decisions for ourselves if we could remove sort of the labels and just see what it is.
Same question?
Yeah, I think it alluded a bit
I
to...
can say, as a European, I wish that Norway and I would say Swiss and maybe some others would join the European Union. But it's up to them to decide. If I would be a Norwegian politician, I don't know how I would explain to my people that we are forced to apply to more or less every decision of the European Union without having a say in it. So I think this is just I know that you were afraid, the Norwegians, afraid of your fishery resources and your gas resources. Well, this now really, as you at least pointed to, the debate is now the world about fishery resources. I think it's not, but I know it's a national issue in a way. And okay, up to you. But I think it's hard to explain to the people that you are part of a union without having political power in the union. So, but the same is true for Swiss, for example. But for Europe, that would be a great push, as NATO really thrived by Sweden and Finland making the decision and overcoming neutrality. So as you just said for Norway, I mean, this was a big thing. They were longer neutral than Norway was not part of the European Union. This is like a political or national identity thing for them, and they overcame it, and it was good for NATO that time, and then Trump entered office a second phase. Apart from the question of Norway entering the European Union, I think the question is exactly where it's laying on the table right now, where Gunhild brought us to, and also Klaus. The debate now, or the conflict, is not so much between the old Cold War situation. It's about, how shall I phrase them, authoritarian countries or governments and liberal democracies. And that could shift, of course, rightly so. I think there's hope that also America becomes more kind of partner again, but it will never be the same as before. Even if whoever will be the next American president, and even if he or she would be a Democrat, they will more look to the Southeast. China plays a different role for America. Not all their focus is about the Atlantic and the European continent. So I think in a way we are, as you said, Gunhild, we are doomed to fix our shit and to bring our things together. And therefore the question is, I think the remaining question is it wise to form a kind of all-united coalition of the liberal democracy of the world, including Australia and South Korea and who else? Or is this kind of imperial overstretch? Because we can't really adapt to their problem as well. And if not, and I think this would be too much. I think they are fine partners, and we should cooperate with them, and all kinds of academic and technological cooperation should be done. But we can't really. I mean, it's so hard to care about our own neighborhood. So this would be like too much in a way. And where is this too much ending? So the remaining question is it the European Union as it is with new partners, and then find a special relationship with Canada, for example? Or is this even too much because Bulgaria, Romania, I don't know, Greece maybe, for them the North Atlantic is far away. And this is open, I think. If they think about it twice, and you see that Pedro Sanchez joined this coalition of the seven, the coalition of the willing, this was a strong sign against Trump. It's not only the Nordics. So you can argue, is the European Union as it is, plus, and maybe this child gets another name because we won't get our British partners coming say, well, we made a mistake, but this is easy. To name a thing, every politician can find another name that is interesting. Or do we need a new focus on the north, and I don't know, then it's Germany's in the between. So Germany's maybe part of it, but not Austria, sorry. Maybe, I don't know. Somewhere there's a new alliance. But this is, I think, this is the question that is on the table, and Norway definitely is part of it, right? So there's no way out. Norway has to be part of it, and I think it wants also to be part of it.
I think I'm going to end up saying something exactly as my colleagues have been doing, but in a slightly different way or whatever, I think we're already recognizing the importance of the Arctic. So we can't look away from that. Insofar as particularly with climate change, increases in transport and interest in transport, and with the natural resources, not least with minerals and rare earth minerals and so forth. So we know the Arctic is now a focal point for not just Arctic security, but global security. At the same time, I think when we really get down to it, and those of us who've been doing focus on the Arctic, we've known there is an Arctic. There's at the very least, North American Arctic, European Arctic, Russian Arctic. The conditions are very different. The political systems are very different, so there's so many differences. So it's very difficult to just sort of just talk about the Arctic as a whole. And as such, that facilitates, I think, an understanding where we can have tighter coalitions, as what's been talked about here, and as Klaus was saying, have maybe different corridors, different sort of lines around different countries, but that we don't necessarily exclude others either, but that we can have sort of like, I remember doing work in Afghanistan, the inkblot type of method, and that is actually first gather the horses around, the central point you're thinking of, and then you can just start spreading your connections and stuff. And we need to be thinking about that. We need to think geopolitically in different ways than we have been. So while we have the United, and not to exclude the United States, we have a lot of American partners who we know are very supportive of a lot of what we're talking about. But so long as there is a regime in place that is challenging, the best we have is to be a strong, independent, welcoming partner to the United States, but not necessarily, we can also say, but with Canada, we redraw some lines. And one thing that's really important about the whole, the values question about democracies and stuff, and on the one hand, it's kind of like, oh, it's so nice, we want to protect liberal democracy. The thing is that because we have open societies and liberal democracies, and again, I'm not parading liberal democracies as sort of like a perfect system. It's not, but I would prefer it over any other alternatives we have out there today. But because we're relatively open, we're also very much susceptible to hybrid threat activities. And these are with, like as I was saying, with like espionage, sabotage, disinformation, influence campaigns, blah, blah, blah. We are susceptible to that. We are susceptible to polarization. We see that in a lot of countries, also in European countries. So we need to keep this in mind as well, that it's multi-level and it goes to the societal level. So now when we're talking about geopolitics, in fact, we in society are actors in geopolitics. And so we need to reorient how we think about who is doing what. That's it.
Fantastic. So many questions. Let's start in the front, then we have one here. Another one. Mike, I guess we have a mic. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Holly Hasted from the Science Centre of Northern Norway. I have a comment and then a question for the whole panel. So my comment is regarding, Andreas, a comment that you made earlier on, which was that wondering perhaps does the EU lack a strong leader to take us forth in this story. And I would actually say it's not a leader that we're lacking, but we're lacking a story. The EU lacks a supranational narrative that can identify and celebrate our collective interest. And I come to the word interest, and I jump over then to Robert, and I think you made a really interesting comment, which was that it's very difficult. We can identify the interests of the great powers, but it's more difficult to identify the interests of the EU within a realpolitik perspective. So my question then is for the panel, thinking within the context of the geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, and thinking within the context of realpolitik, what, in your sort of professional opinion, should the interests of the EU and Norway and Canada be? Is it about raw materials? What is it? What should the story be that politicians tell their publics?
All right, thank you. We'll collect 2-3 questions. The second hand was raised in the very end. Yep, very end. Guy standing. Maybe you can also introduce yourself, please.
Hello, yes, my name is Kazimierz Łysiak. I'm a reporter from Poland, from Polish Public Broadcaster, an English language channel, and I mean the Arctic. is becoming very much of interest to Poland as well. I mean, we're getting a lot of our gas from Norway. I'll start with a question to Chancellor Habeck, because you mentioned clear stated interests in the Arctic, and I'm interested what would be Germany's clear stated interests in the Arctic. And I mean, there is the question of priorities as well here, as we are, expanding into our defense, we're raising defense spending, but how can we also focus on the Arctic if we're doing that? And then a question broadly to the entire panel as well, I guess. What about concrete actions? Because, I mean, we're seeing concrete actions from the United States, for example, in regards to the Shadow Fleet. We're seeing these ships being seized. And are we about to see more action from Europe when it comes to, for example, the Shadow Fleet, but maybe other spheres as well, when it comes to security? Because we are doing a lot of talking, but are we about to see some more concrete actions? Of course, we are bound by international law. But is this the case that international law is now, being put in the backseat a little bit, and maybe we should start, playing the same game as Russia is? Thanks.
Thank you. And the question, gentleman here. Yeah, and then I saw the three of you.
Thanks so much, Hong Yuan from China, Shanghai Tongji University. I just follow these questions about we pay too little attention to the rule-based order based order on the United Nations, and United Nations, particularly China and EU, EU and other global South countries have quite a lot of comments for United Nations for multilateral framework. This is my question is that if and how EU and China and other countries can strengthen United Nations, particularly if the international justice courts can have a jurisdiction adversary on Greenland or on Arctic, also based on the UN Assembly, based on the consensus of all the countries, maybe except the United States, because China, EU, actually, we are really support a partner for United Nations based order. The secondly, about we talk so much about some interests, conflicts, but we should also to care of the future generation, about the Arctic, the future, particularly for net zero goals. So this is the impossible triangle for EU is net zero, energy security, or the currently the economic development. So for this point, maybe China, EU can work together for the future net zero, for the net zero economy or net zero futures, for maybe common investment for the global South countries and other areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's first tackle those three questions. Just to summarize them, it's about interests, concrete actions, maybe a new story, and about strengthening multilateral frameworks and maybe bilateral cooperation efforts between Europe and China. So the interest story and how to concretize them into action. Robert, they were asking you.
Yeah. So, with one sentence, I mean, Germany has a lot of problems and a lot of interests. But first of all, I have to admit, and I think the same is true for Poland, that most of Germans, and including most of German politicians, are completely unaware of this debate. Maybe this has changed a little bit due to the last 2 weeks, but basically every German I asked talking about Greenland was, what the fuck is going on? So Greenland, are they crazy? So the urgency that this is a potential zone of conflict, nobody was aware of it. Maybe but basically I would say that most Germans would still think, well, he's a crazy king in the White House, and tomorrow it's not Greenland, but I don't know what he wants, New Zealand maybe, or Iceland, or whatever. So it's going up and forth. That there's a reason for everything, they doubt it, I think. And I think, to be honest, working now in a Danish institution, the Nordics are also very much concentrated on themselves. So there's a very close relations. They have included the Baltics, but they forgot that the Baltic Sea has also southern neighbors, Poland and Germany. So we are not really part of the discussion. So this is what I meant. The south means south of the Baltic Sea. European countries are not really part of this engaged discussion you are familiar with. And I think the German interest is that we understand what's going on there. And then the second interest, as we are really For Germany, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was kind of a wake-up call. I would say the first interest is that nothing of the same would happen on the east flank and not in the Arctic region. So the horror scenario I always had when the Greenland debate was on, that that Trump was calling Putin and saying, "Come on, let me take Greenland and you take Svalbard, and then that's it." Well, who should do anything against it, because they never could fight both of us, and we have separate zones of interest, and you have northeast Europe, and we have the rest, and then we can find our muddling through, and Norway, Germany, Great Britain, who cares? That this is not going to happen, because this can easily spill over, and then we have a major war starting in the Arctic or in the eastern flank, and the same is true for Estonia, of course. Some minor villages, islands maybe, where nobody really heard about, and not really many people are living, and really not commercial interests are we really able to ready to go to war about this? This is my fear, and I think the German interest, that this is not going to happen, because if it's going to happen, then it's starting, and then it's Poland somehow, and then we are moving into a dark era. Last remark, that I don't talk too long about China. I think both is true. First of all, the European interest with a cooperation with China is a different interest, just neutral description, than the Americans have. America has decided that China is now the big threat, as you just pointed out. And the Europeans don't want to be, I don't know, kind of a Chinese colony in a way, where China has all the technical knowledge, the raw materials, and we become independent of Chinese technique, including, sorry to our Chinese partners and friends here on the conference, the Chinese way of running a state. This is the big European fear. But to be true, and I had this discussion many times in my office, the Chinese way of thinking about this, defending the old world order, is just another way of prolonging our kind of technological imperialism that really we profited on. So to be true to them, they really think that what they are doing is kind of a fair offer, and the Europeans are afraid. It's hard to find the solutions there, but the only point I'd like to say is, it's a different approach the Europeans could have to China than the Americans have. And the Americans have a different approach to China than to Russia. For us, for me, I would say China is the big threat in the Arctic. For the Americans, I think it's the competition with China. So you see, defining interest is not buying it from the other world, for the old world gone, and translated to the other one, looking really into the actions of the big powers. I think this is necessary.
Thank you. Anybody else on interest, strengthening multilateral frameworks?
Just really quickly, I definitely think European countries should play by international laws. I think if we all start just doing whatever we want, then it's not going to be good for anyone. And I love the question of like our story. Let's spitball afterwards. I was just thinking, this is something I sort of often encounter, that Europeans, we have a good life comparatively. I'm happy I'm not a US citizen, because then you need to be very rich to have a good life. And I think most Chinese people have a better life now than maybe their parents did at the same age. But it's really hard. So maybe something along the European story will be like a good life for you and democracy. But let's spitball afterwards. Yes.
Sorry, somebody said the shadow fleet. I think that's a really important observation. The shadow fleet is extensive. The numbers vary, but we've got at least 900, 1,000 sanctioned tankers. But the number can go up to several more thousand. We have every tool we need as Europeans and others to tackle the shadow fleet problem if we want to. The other thing to bear in mind is, and this is a fairer auditing of China, thanks to Chinese investment, we have a global shipping industry. The United States wasn't building any ships, and we've all benefited from China's investment in shipping and manufacturing capability. So we do need to have a fair-minded assessment about China's contribution. But we also, let's not be naive. For China, the Arctic, the oceans, the Antarctic space, these are strategic frontiers. So let's not get carried away in terms of thinking this is an easy partner to work with. These are great powers with great power interests. For me, at the moment, the most impressive political leader is Strub. I actually think what he's got to say about values-based realism is probably where we need to start. Not end, but start. because that's part of the storytelling. It's something about values, I suspect, will help build that narrative. I think all of us are, and I'm sorry, I'm sure wrong direction. Very much agree with your question.
Thank you very much. We have 3 more questions. Very end.
A question online on
Okay.
the online tool. Somebody was asking about the role of Switzerland in all of this, because we've talked about the UK, the EU, and so on. Yeah, and then I'll hand over.
Yes, gentleman here.
Yes, hello, Elias, Arctic Today. I'm curious, mainly to begin with, to Robert. 4 years ago, your chancellor stood and gave his Zeitenwende speech that gained a lot of attention, and I think many felt that, well, this is finally Europe getting its act together. Yet we are here 4 years later talking about kind of the same things, and you get this kind of sense of a shrugging of the shoulders, and this kind of learned helplessness that seems to grab Europe. I'm from Iceland myself, and now there's a big debate going on whether Iceland should join the European Union. And I'm curious, you are standing here talking about, well, we're going to see the fragmentation of the European Union. I think it's kind of likely. How do you sell that to the people of Norway and Iceland? You should join when it kind of feels that, well, this is, it's kind of going okay, I don't know. And I'm also curious, and this is to the rest of you more, we're always getting more and more information about the hybrid warfare that Russia has been waging on Europe. And I mean, recently we've been finding out how much Russia, through unscrupulous Western actors, has been financing political parties on the far right mainly. And I'm curious, how much of this kind of learned helplessness comes from that hybrid warfare from Russia, and are we doing enough to counter it?
All right, the gentleman here raised his hand first.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you. Tom Mulesman from Time Magazine in the United States. I can't help but note that we're 300 kilometers from Russia, so I can't help but ask the question. We've heard it here this morning. We've talked about it many times at Arctic Frontiers, that the conflict has been occurring under the threshold. And then, Vice Chancellor Habeck, you mentioned that we have the possibility of a conflict starting in the Arctic as opposed to spilling over to the Arctic. Could you offer just some observations, a hypothetical about how that might occur, what could be done to prevent it? Thank you.
And then, lady here.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Bullock. I'm British, but I spent the last 3 years in Ukraine, in the Donbass and in the south. And we've had a lot of wonderful illustrations today about hybrid warfare. We've talked about alliances that should include, hopefully, the UK, which as a Brit myself, I certainly agree with. And we've even had Switzerland mentioned. We haven't really had Ukraine mentioned at all. And there is a consistently a danger, particularly in media narratives, around seeing Ukraine as a pity party that needs to be supported as opposed to a strategic ally. Although I myself lived through Russia's conventional warfare, actually since moving back to the UK, it is hybrid warfare I'm the most alive to, and the piece around disinformation and fragmentation and polarization, as you spoke about so well. So how do we, as the coalition of liberal democracies, let's call it that, leverage Ukrainian expertise as those who know it best of how to counter these Russian threats?
Thank you very much. We have 3 more minutes, and just to summarize the questions, I think it's very much about Zeitenwende, Ukraine, hybrid warfare, and I think it's a fantastic round of questions also to put that into Arctic context, because it highlights that a lot of things outside affect this very place. So
Should we do a division of labour? Because I'm happy to speak about Ukraine. I don't know if others. We just take
whatever you feel comfortable, or Switzerland, They have high
I don't know
mountains
which
too.
one of these. There we go. Yeah, hybrid warfare, hybrid threats, hybrid threat activities, hybrid threats, hybrid warfare. Because a hybrid threat activity, and that's what we are largely being bombarded with in the Arctic and an increasing scale. That does not necessarily mean it is threat yet. Contrary to, say, a bomb. If a bomb drops here, we all sort of objectively experience that particular threat. The thing with hybrid threat activities, particularly to influence our societies, we talk about under threshold, and the civilian domain is the target. Increase distrust, increase doubt, increase fear. Well, actually, we do have mechanisms to combat this, and we refer to it as trust, which is really kind of loosey-goosey, but nevertheless, we need to look at the mechanisms of trust that we have so that hybrid threat activities do not become a hybrid threat. That is, that we perceive it as a threat, and that is what's disintegrating our society. So these, there's a lot to talk about there, but actually trust, and that comes back also to that narrative for Europe and stuff. I don't think we necessarily need to come up with a new narrative, but we need to build up trust around these values we claim we have stood for all along, but at least be more both truthful about it, but believable. You know, we've lost a lot of trust, actually, in those values. That trust is instrumental to combating hybrid threat activities. So I will leave it at there. I have things to say about the other stuff, but I'll let, yeah.
2 remarks, Germany and the potential, zone of conflict in the Arctic. I start with later. What was striking to me when I first started my research on the Arctic is how much the Russian rhetoric is similar to what I read about Ukraine before 2014. So the red Arctic, like Soviet Union myth, the Russian flag on the North Pole, the idea of some harder people living in the Arctic, this combination of technology and proud of the nation, claiming the Arctic as Russian zone of infosphere, like the ages, like back to Peter the Great. So this is all there. Well, you can say this is all just storytelling and maybe nationalistic narratives, but when you see what happened in Ukraine, this was the preparation. So the articles Putin wrote before starting his first aggression or first war on Ukraine were exactly the same. And everyone in Germany, and including, I would say, myself, oversaw it and said, well, he's just talking. And then it happened. And now what's happening, it's an interesting question, how do war starts? But basically, we can say often they start with minor conflicts that escalate because then national pride and also the rhetoric of the leaders to their own people can be overcome. So. And it's very easy to imagine some situation like this. Maybe only a fishery trawler is controlled by Norwegian police officers if they stick to the fishery agreement. And maybe a drunken Russian captain pushed the Norwegian policeman overboard, and then the trawler is arrested. And then Putin says, well, this is the Russian trawler. And it comes out there was not only drunken Russian salesman on it, but maybe an officer, a Russian officer. And then suddenly you have a major conflict. Svalbard, I think, is a zone where a lot of overlapping interests are there that were not covered in the Svalbard Treaty, mainly regarding to space. Then all this, what Gudenhild is expert in, all the hybrid warfare. What if we detect a Russian ship really destroying something, a glass fiber cable, and we are not letting it just go and drive away, but we arrest it, and maybe someone is shooting at someone. So it's very easy to see how much is going on, and this is not like Second World War, and then we have a full-scale invasion like in Ukraine. I think this is not going to happen, but it's very easy that some scenario could evolve where someone is saying, well, we have to protect our people, and then we send a troop or ship, and then somehow the things are escalating. And the same we could also see now. Well, the Greenland issue was not so far away, at least in the imagination we could also bring. Zeitenwende, this is very much related to Ukraine, I would say. When the war in Ukraine started, everyone in Germany, I would say everyone in Europe, maybe in the world, thought, well, this is the Putin craziness, but this is a local conflict. And as bad as it is, and as many Ukrainians are dying, this is a fight in a local conflict if the rules-based order will survive or not. And then now everyone is like a second awakening, seeing it's over. The rules-based order for the time being is now it's destroyed. And maybe there are some countries who can defend something of the same. We discussed it now. So Zeitenwende was meant to be, this is now happening in Europe again, but nobody could imagine first that the war endured 4 years and maybe longer. And this was the start of a domino game where all the bricks are falling down. So we had a kind of second Zeitenwende in the period of my term, I would say, and the sense of urgency in Germany is stronger and higher than the political commitments. Last sentence, but the political commitments and actions are there. So therefore, I'm very much speaking for the European Union, because a lot of things have happened now in the course of the last 2 years, I would say, including, and I would like the money go to education or maybe research, but including defense spending, higher defense spending, and also the cooperation. And I think the best proof of the pudding was when the European leaders stood up under the leadership maybe of Mette Frederiksen of Denmark and said, well, now this is stop. And this wasn't done before, and wasn't also not done to help Ukraine, not in this decisiveness we have seen then. So Europe has a chance, not only a chance to survive, but has a chance to become part of this power game of the future.
And just really super quick on how to sell the EU on Norway. So as a Norwegian, I don't know if you want to call it securitization or weaponization of economy, but economy is also important. So I think just a cost-benefit analysis makes it more favorable for Norway to be in than out now.
Very briefly, Klaus.
Ukraine. What connects Iranian drones, North Korean troops, Chinese ammunition, multinational shadow fleets, and Mali mercenaries? Ukraine. So Ukraine has never been a local, regional conflict. Ukraine has been a global conflict. You can also think about other parties that have aided and abetted, particularly the Russian Federation. Ukraine has been a provider of European security, full stop. The idea that somehow Ukraine is a liability or a cost that we should resent is just wild. Thank God for Ukraine. And just think also about the extraordinary industrial defense capability that Ukraine has developed. Hundreds of thousands of drones are now produced every year by Ukraine. Last month, I spoke to a senior representative responsible for security in that country. He told me that in November alone, they estimated they shot down anywhere between 10 to 15,000 drones of various descriptions on their way to do yet more damage to that poor country. So that's part of our story, going back to this point about what holds us together, solidarity.
That's a very strong ending. We're 5 minutes over. I hope you didn't mind. I know there were more questions, so please reach out directly to the panelists. I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you joining that early in the morning. And see you around at the conference.
State is a new
The Nordic